It rests under low light, a fragment of baked river clay, not a stone of monument, but a simple administrative object, small enough to hold in one hand. Its surface is dense with wedge-shaped marks, a language pressed into the damp earth 4,000 years ago. This is not a king's boastful inscription, nor a poem to a lover. It is a record, a list. It details a world being organized, catalogued, and assigned its functions. The lines are even. The hand that made them is steady. It is the work of a scribe, a keeper of inventories. And within this quiet, orderly list, a single term appears with bureaucratic repetition. Gar. A station, a destiny, a function assigned. The term is not poetic. It is the same word a quartermaster might use to assign a guard to a post, or a foreman to assign a worker to a section of a canal. Yet here, in the oldest of humanity's records, it is applied to the waters of the earth, to the reeds of the marsh, to the creatures that move in the darkness. They are not described as being born of divine will in a flash of creation. They are described as being given a station, an operational purpose within a system. The language is one of logistics, not mythology. The act of creation is framed as an act of organization. The air in this room is still, climate-controlled to halt the slow decay of millennia. Outside these walls, the world moves at its own pace. But here, time is a physical substance, a layer of dust that is never allowed to settle. There is only the low hum of the machines that keep the environment stable, and the profound silence of the object itself. It is a silence that seems to hold the memory of the scribe's hand, the dry heat of the Mesopotamian sun, and the weight of the information it was designed to preserve, a weight that seems to grow heavier the longer one looks. These are not simple questions. If you find yourself drawn to the quiet persistence of such inquiries, consider subscribing. It is a way to ensure you are present as we continue to unearth these archives. This tablet is not an anomaly. It is a single entry in a vast, fragmented ledger. From the excavated libraries of Nippur to the temple foundations of Uruk, the pattern repeats. Scribes, separated by centuries and dynasties, used the same dispassionate administrative language to document the ordering of the world. They wrote of separating the sweet waters from the salt, of measuring the sky, of establishing boundaries for habitats. They recorded these events with the same methodical precision they used to log harvests of grain or heads of livestock. It is a consistent, systemic memory of the world being engineered, not sung into existence. Within these administrative texts, there is frequent reference to a place, or perhaps a state of being, called the Abzu. It is often translated as a primordial, subterranean ocean of fresh water. But the functional descriptions betray a different purpose. It is from the Abzu that Enki, the system architect, brings forth the foundational forms of life. It is described as a domain of pure design, a reservoir of templates, a place where the essential patterns, the ME, are stored before being implemented in the physical world. The texts treat it less like a mythological underworld and more like a master workshop, a repository from which the planet's biosphere was to be assembled. There are certain records that do not feel like history. They feel like evidence held in custody. They wait, not for interpretation, but for a context that has been lost to time. To stay near them is not an act of scholarship, but of vigilance. It is to keep watch over a memory that feels older than the clay it is written on, a memory that may not be entirely our own. Those who feel this understand that keeping this archive close is a way of not losing the trail in the long silence. One can almost feel the dry wind that still scours the plains of southern Iraq, blowing dust from the tops of the tells, the man-made hills that conceal the foundations of these ancient cities. Eridu, the first city, the place where the texts say kingship descended from the sky. Today, it is a ruin in a sea of sand, a quiet testament to the scale of time. But the memory it holds, baked into these tablets, speaks of a beginning that was not a beginning at all, but the implementation of a pre-existing plan, a world made functional. But the clay holds only one version of the past. Beneath the foundations of Eridu, beneath the earliest layers of human settlement, the earth itself keeps a different archive, a silent geological record measured in strata of sediment and fossilized bone. This deeper record does not speak of administration or divine purpose. It speaks of biology, of forms of life so extreme, so immense, that they strain the logic of evolution. A record of a world that existed long before the scribe, and which bears little resemblance to the orderly, functional system he so meticulously documented. And so, we begin not with an answer, but with a dissonance, a deep and unsettling divide between two records of the same planet. On one hand, the cool, procedural language of the scribe, describing a world organized with the logic of an engineer. On the other, the silent, fossilized evidence of a world of biological titans that seem to defy that very logic. The question, then, is not what the tablets say, but what they were written to forget. What kind of order is built upon the memory of a world that had to be erased? The work of the scribe is not found in a single definitive volume. It is scattered across thousands of fragments, a distributed ledger of a world under construction. Tablet BM 74329, for instance, is not a story. It is a list. It assigns Ge'ar, a station, to the carp of the southern marshes. It assigns a function to the tamarisk tree that grows along the riverbank. The text does not celebrate these forms of life. It registers them, files them under their designated purpose, as if taking inventory of a newly stocked storeroom. Each entry is a line item in a cosmic bill of lading. From the temple archives at Nippur, a different tablet, catalogued under a different number, repeats the formula. Here, the assignments are broader. Jar is applied not to a single species, but to an entire environmental zone. The text speaks of the ordering of the delta, Shesios, the stabilization of the coastline, and the assignment of the high desert. The language is that of a civil engineer or a regional planner, mapping out resource allocation for a vast territory. The world is presented as a project site, with each ecosystem a designated work zone, its parameters defined and its functions set. One observes the consistency of the hand, even across centuries and cities. The cuneiform impressions are neat, uniform, economical. This is not the flourish of an artist or the passionate testimony of a prophet. It is the standardized script of a bureaucracy. The repetition of phrases, the formulaic structure of the lists, the absence of poetic ambiguity, all point to a shared scribal tradition, a protocol for recording information of a very specific and functional nature. The medium itself becomes part of the message. This is how one documents an operation. The records descend into finer detail. A text from Uruk specifies the relationships between species within a single habitat. It reads like a technical manual for a closed system. The predator of the gazelle is assigned its hunting ground. The scavenger is assigned the remains. The grasses are assigned their season of growth to sustain the herd. The biosphere is not described as a web of interconnected life that evolved together, but as a series of interlocking components, each with a predetermined role installed to maintain the operational balance of the whole. Some fragments are purely numerical. They list cycles, durations, and measures. One tablet speaks of a period of 7 generations required for a particular marsh to reach stability. Another mentions a calculation involving the movement of celestial bodies to determine the optimal timing for the release of new forms. The numbers are presented without narrative context, as cold data points in a larger calculation. They are the raw figures from a project timeline, the quantitative analysis of a planetary-scale implementation. The silence in the archive room feels different when one is faced with such numbers. It is no longer just the absence of sound. It becomes a measure of the temporal distance between the scribe's hand and our own. The low hum of the climate control seems to mark the passage of the 4,000 years that separate the act of recording from the act of reading. The dust is held at bay, but the weight of that time presses down on the baked clay, a physical presence in the still air. Within these operational logs, a specific term appears, me. The scribes list them by number. Me 22, the blueprint of the lion. Me 23, the principle of its roar. Me 24, the instinct for the hunt. These are not abstract concepts or divine attributes. They are catalogued like design templates, discrete packets of information that define the form, function, and behavior of a living organism. The texts treat them as fundamental units of creation, the source code from which a species is assembled and deployed. The name Enki is attached to these lists, but his title is not Creator God. He is designated Lord of the Abzu, the Keeper of the Me. His role is that of a custodian, an archivist of biological designs. The Abzu itself is described not as a mythical underworld but as the repository where these templates are stored. The language suggests a master library of genetic and functional information, a secure vault from which Enki retrieves the necessary designs for implementation in the physical world. It is the work of a systems architect, not a deity. There is another name that recurs in the administrative hierarchy, Enlil. Where Enki's function is tied to design and the Abzu, Enlil's is one of execution and territorial control. The tablets record his decrees. The plains are hereby assigned to Enlil. The beasts of the steppe shall answer to his station. A clear division of labor is documented. One entity manages the design repository. Another oversees the deployment and management of those designs in the field. It is a corporate structure for the administration of a planet. It is quiet here. The only sound is the low frequency of the building itself. In the room where you sit, there is also a quiet. Notice the time on the clock. It is a simple act of recording, a mark against the flow of hours, an administrative entry in your own day, much like the ones the scribe once made in his. The records also contain protocols for modification. One text speaks of perfecting the wild bull. The list of changes is specific. Its aggression was tempered. Its horns were reshaped for contests of dominance, not death. Its place in the herd was made firm. This is not the language of evolution or divine whim. It is the language of engineering, of a deliberate upgrade performed on an existing biological model to improve its performance and integration within the system. These are patch notes for a living creature. Another tablet details the process for stabilizing a species. It describes adjusting breeding cycles, altering dietary needs, and defining migratory patterns to prevent systemic imbalance. The goal stated in the text is efficiency and predictability. Life is treated as a variable to be controlled, a set of operational parameters to be fine-tuned to ensure the smooth functioning of the entire biome. The scribe records these adjustments with the same dispassionate clarity he uses for logging grain shipments. The mind seeks a category for this information. It is not mythology, for it lacks narrative drama and moral lessons. It is not history, for it describes events that seem to precede human agency. It is not science, for its premises are alien to our understanding of the world. It exists in a space between these frameworks. A collection of technical documents for a project so vast it defies our sense of scale, recorded by a clerk, who saw no need to explain the context. The records are not uniformly positive. They contain troubleshooting guides. Fragments from SIPAR outline procedures for dealing with forms that deviate from their assigned ME. They list containment protocols and methods for culling anomalies from the system. The language is sterile, focused on maintaining the integrity of the original design specifications. A failed or mutated organism is not a tragedy. It is a defective unit that must be removed from the production line. One list, badly damaged, is particularly unsettling. It enumerates species that were recalled to the Abzu. The term is not destroyed or killed. It is recalled, at, an administrative word for taking a product out of circulation. The implication is that the process of implementation was reversible. A species could be decommissioned, its template returned to the archive, its physical presence erased from the operating system of the world. The scribe notes these recalls without comment. What is most striking is the complete absence of justification. The scribe never records the why. He does not write that the wild bull was perfected because it was noble, or that a species was recalled because it was evil. The texts contain only the procedure, the action, and the outcome. There is no recorded morality, no ethical debate, no sense of wonder or regret. It is simply a ledger of operations, a dispassionate accounting of a system being managed. The scope of these operations eventually expands beyond the biological. A tablet from the library of Ashurbanipal, a copy of a much older text from Eridu, lists the initial establishments. Alongside the assignment of habitats for reeds and fish, it records the measurement of the celestial sphere, the calibration of the planetary axis, and the setting of the winds in their four quarters. The management of local ecology is presented as a subset of a much larger project, the complete environmental calibration of the planet. A different kind of silence falls now. It is the silence of implication. The meticulous, bureaucratic nature of these records, when read plainly, points to a conclusion that the mind is reluctant to form. This was not the management of a kingdom's resources. It was not the organization of a single city-state. The scribe, in his steady, repetitive hand, was documenting the functional assembly of a world, from its geological parameters to its biological inhabitants, as if it were all part of a single, unified, and centrally managed enterprise. The researcher works under a single low-hanging lamp. The light pools on a vast table, illuminating not original tablets, but precise, scaled photographs and line-for-line transcriptions laid out like a mosaic. Fragments from Uruk are placed beside those from Nippur. A list from Eridu is aligned with a text unearthed 1,000 miles and 5 centuries away. The air is still, charged with the quiet intensity of comparison. The work is not of discovery, but of connection. The hand moves slowly, deliberately, not excavating earth, but tracing the faint lines of a pattern that begins to emerge from the scattered data, a ghost image forming from disparate points of light. The first thread that connects them all is the language itself. The researcher's finger stops on the cuneiform sign for Gayar. It is there on a tablet from the south, documenting the function of a marsh reed. And it is there again, identical, on a fragment from the north, assigning a station to a desert predator. It is the same cold administrative term, used with the same dispassionate precision across dynasties and dialects. This is not the organic drift of mythological language. It is the standardized lexicon of a bureaucracy, a shared technical vocabulary for the management of a world. Such consistency implies a central source, a common training. The scribes, separated by generations, were not independent authors inventing their own cosmologies. They were clerks, following a strict established protocol for data entry. The system they documented was not a collection of local folk tales that happened to resemble one another. It was a single, coherent operational framework, described everywhere in the same functional terms. The repetition is not a sign of cultural diffusion, but of a shared and unchanging procedural manual. One pauses. The low hum of the building's ventilation system seems to fade, replaced by the profound silence of this realization. The sheer scale of the coordination required to maintain such linguistic and conceptual uniformity over centuries is difficult to comprehend. It speaks of an administrative system so stable, so deeply embedded, that it functioned independently of the rise and fall of kings and cities. It was a layer of information management that operated beneath the surface of what we call history. A new arrangement of the documents on the table begins. The researcher now groups the fragments by the names they contain. A clear pattern of hierarchy emerges from the chaos. Tablets mentioning Enki are consistently associated with the Abzu and the cataloging of the ME, the design templates. In contrast, texts that speak of Enlil deal with territorial assignments, the enforcement of boundaries, and the direct governance of the implemented world. A distinct and unwavering division of labor is present in every record. This is not a pantheon of squabbling anthropomorphic gods. It is an organizational chart. Enki's role is that of a chief designer or a head of research and development, presiding over a repository of core assets. Enlil's is that of a chief operating officer, overseeing the deployment and management of those assets in the field. The relationship is functional, corporate. The texts document a command structure for a planetary-scale enterprise, with clear roles, responsibilities, and spheres of influence. To see this structure is to recognize that we are no longer reading myths. We are auditing the records of an organization. Those who remain with this archive understand this shift. It is a commitment to a different kind of seeing, a willingness to follow the evidence of the system, even when it leads far from the familiar narratives of the past. Staying close to this work is a way of keeping the file open, of being present for the next connection. The researcher now isolates the fragments that list the ME. When laid side by side, the lists from disparate locations show an almost impossible consistency. The blueprint of the lion is not described with poetic variation. It is listed as ME22. The principle of the hunt is a specific, numbered entry. This is not the fluid, evolving nature of an oral tradition. It is the rigid, structured data of a technical database, a parts catalog where each component has a fixed designation. The implication is stark. The scribes were not composing these lists. They were transcribing them. The remarkable consistency across time and space suggests they were all copying from a single, unchanging master file. The Abzu, then, was not a mythical place so much as a central server, a master archive where the source code for the planet's biology was stored. The act of creation, as recorded by the scribes, was an act of accessing this database and deploying its files. A moment of stillness. The mind struggles to hold the sheer, cold logic of it. Life, in its infinite variety, reduced to a numbered catalog. The roar of a predator, the intricate weave of a spider's web, the silent growth of a tree, all filed as discrete lines of code, as functional templates stored in a non-physical space. The silence in the room is the silence of a world recontextualized, its familiar magic replaced by an alien and incomprehensible technology. The final grouping of texts is the most unsettling. The researcher pulls forward the fragments detailing system maintenance. Here are the protocols for culling anomalies, the procedures for dealing with forms that deviate from their ME. And here are the lists of species designated for recall to the Abzu. Again, the language is identical across the sources. It is the sterile, procedural language of a quality control inspector or a logistics manager handling a product recall. The existence of these standardized protocols for error correction and decommissioning is perhaps the most powerful evidence of a managed system. One does not write troubleshooting manuals for gods or for nature. One writes them for complex, engineered systems that are expected to produce errors, to deviate from their design, and to occasionally require the removal of defective components. This is the language of active, ongoing system administration. The scene changes. The researcher stands now in a different kind of archive. Not a room of clay, but of bone. The air is cool and dry. Before them, resting on a velvet cloth, is the femur of a Columbian mammoth. It is immense, a piece of biological architecture that seems to defy gravity. The researcher runs a gloved hand along its length, feeling the impossible scale of the creature it once supported. This is the other record, the one written not by a scribe, but by life itself. And here, the pattern is inverted. The paleontological record of the late Pleistocene is not one of balance, efficiency, or careful management. It is a record of biological extremism. Gigantism was the norm, not the exception. Giant sloths, terrifyingly large bears, birds with wingspans that blotted out the sun. This was a world of biological titans, creatures whose size and energy requirements seem, from a modern perspective, profoundly inefficient and unsustainable. A system running at maximum, not in equilibrium. The researcher returns to the table, placing a perfect cast of a Smilodon's canine tooth next to the transcription of a tablet that speaks of perfecting the wild bull. The two patterns, the two archives, are now in direct confrontation. On one side, the scribe's record of a world being meticulously organized, stabilized, and fine-tuned for efficiency. On the other, the fossil evidence of a world that was a crucible of biological excess, a system seemingly designed for maximum scale and power, not for balance. This brings the final pattern into focus, for it is a pattern of absence. The researcher scans the entirety of the textual evidence laid out on the table. The scribes recorded the world's functional assembly. They documented its operational protocols and its maintenance procedures. But nowhere in their vast, meticulous administrative ledger is there any record of the megafauna. No mention of the colossal beasts that once dominated the planet. No log entry for the system-wide crash that erased them. This is not a simple gap in history, an accidental omission. It is a structured and profound silence. The records that detail the stabilization of the coastline and the tempering of the wild bull's aggression have no corresponding entry for the management, purpose, or catastrophic failure of the planet's most dominant life forms. The pattern suggests a deliberate redaction, a set of operational files from which the project's most ambitious phase and its ultimate system-wide collapse have been surgically removed. The act concludes in this unresolved tension. The two records, one of meticulous administration, the other of biological impossibility, lie side by side under the low light, speaking in contradictory languages. The patterns, once revealed, do not solve the mystery. They deepen it, giving it structure and a terrifying new scale. The question is no longer simply what the tablets mean, but what kind of truth is being concealed by an administrative system that records the function of a reed, but omits the existence of a mammoth. The researcher's hand hovers over a transcription. A name appears, repeated with the frequency of a line manager's signature on a work order, Enki. The texts do not introduce him with a genealogy of gods or a hymn of praise. He is defined by his operational title, Lord of the Abzu. His function is stated with cold clarity. He is the custodian of the ME, the keeper of the master designs. His recorded actions are not those of a creator god birthing a world from chaos, but of an archivist retrieving specific files from a secure repository for deployment. The role is one of immense responsibility, yet it is framed as a technical one. Enki is shown in the texts, inspecting the foundations, calibrating the measures, and certifying the forms before they are released from the Abzu. He is a quality control specialist, a systems engineer ensuring that each biological component meets its design specifications before it is integrated into the larger, functioning world. The language is that of a technician signing off on a piece of hardware, not a deity breathing life into clay. One must pause to consider the implications of such a role. A being whose primary function is the management of a biological design archive. It removes the entire affair from the realm of the sacred and places it squarely in the domain of administration. The creation of life is presented not as a miracle, but as a process of accessing a database and executing a set of pre-existing instructions. The silence that follows this thought is the sound of a familiar world receding. Another designation appears in the ledgers, distinct in function, Enlil, Where Enki's name is tied to the Abzu and the source code of life, Enlil's is associated with the world itself. The texts record his decrees as matters of territorial administration. The plains of the Eden are assigned to Enlil. The boundaries of the marshlands shall be set by his command. He shall oversee the stations of the four winds. His authority is terrestrial, executive. He is a governor, a regional director managing the deployed assets. The relationship between these two entities, as documented, is a clear division of labor. Enki presides over the design and storage of the biological templates. Enlil manages the physical environment into which those templates are deployed and supervises their function in situ. It is a corporate structure, with one department for research and development and another for field operations. Their occasional disputes, recorded in other texts, read less like epic battles and more like interdepartmental conflicts over resource allocation and project jurisdiction. To see the structure laid bare is to see the machinery beneath the myth. The scribe, in his meticulous record-keeping, was not chronicling a family of gods. He was documenting an organizational chart. The consistency of these roles across thousands of tablets and hundreds of years points to a stable, long-term administrative system overseeing the management of the planet. A system with clear hierarchies, defined responsibilities, and a persistent operational purpose. Below these two primary directors, another category of operative is listed, the Igigi. The texts are specific about their function. They are a labor force. Their tasks are large-scale, physical, and foundational. They are recorded as having dug the ancient riverbeds and piled up the mountains of the frontier. The language used to describe their work is that of a foreman's logbook, detailing the completion of massive civil engineering projects that shape the very topography of the land. Their role is explicitly subordinate. The texts describe them as working under the direction of the Enlil department, executing the grand-scale terraforming required before the finer biological systems could be implemented. There is no poetry in the description of their labor. It is presented as a necessary, arduous, and purely functional phase of the overall project. They are the construction crew, the workers who lay the foundation before the specialists arrive. The mind hesitates. A celestial hierarchy described not in terms of power, glory, or divine right, but in terms of management, labor, and civil engineering. The strangeness of the record is not its fantastical content, but its profound and unsettling rationality. It is a world-building project described with the dispassionate vocabulary of a project manager's status report. The beings involved are not objects of worship, but personnel fulfilling their assigned roles. A fourth type of functionary is also documented, with a very different role. They are called the Apkallu. They are not laborers or governors. The texts describe them as technicians, specialists sent to interface directly with a new developing component of the system, humanity. Their task is the transfer of knowledge. They are recorded as bringing the foundational ME of civilization, writing, law, agriculture, architecture, to the first cities. This is not described as a benevolent gift. It is framed as an installation process. The Apkallu are the field technicians who install the basic operating system and software packages required for a new user group to become functional within the larger system. They are not prophets revealing divine truth. They are instructors, trainers, deploying a standardized curriculum of civilization to bring a new species online and make it productive. A clear pattern solidifies from these records. Each of these others is defined entirely by their function within a system. Enki, the archivist of designs. Enlil, the territorial manager. The Igigi, the engineering labor force. The Apkallu, the knowledge transfer technicians. They are not gods who demand faith. They are operatives with job descriptions. The entire narrative recorded by the scribe is an organizational one. The texts also speak of a governing body, the assembly of the great gods. But here, too, the function is administrative. This is not a description of a divine court filled with praise and ceremony. It is a boardroom. The tablets record the proceedings of their meetings. They debate courses of action. They review reports on the state of the world system, and they vote on decrees. Their decisions are recorded as strategic directives for the management of the project. In these assembly records, they authorize the recall of certain biological lines. They approve new environmental calibrations, and they resolve jurisdictional disputes between the primary directors. The language is that of corporate governance, of a board making executive decisions about the future of a vast and complex enterprise. The fate of the world is decided not by divine whim, but by committee vote, based on operational reports. A different kind of silence now fills the room. It is the silence that comes after a fundamental category error has been corrected. These beings, as they themselves recorded their actions, were not gods. They were the board, the management, and the workforce of a planetary-scale corporation. The world was their asset, and life itself was the product they were engineering, deploying, and managing. And so the names, Enki, Enlil, Igigi, cease to be mythical figures. They become mere designations on a table of organization. They are titles in a hierarchy, entries in an administrative ledger. The scribe did not explain who they were or where they came from. He only recorded what they did. Their presence in the text is not an answer to the mystery of our origins. It is simply a record of the personnel who ran the system, a system whose purpose remains entirely and silently off the books. The researcher's gaze moves from the text to the space between the texts. The scribe's hand was meticulous, his record of the world's assembly a model of administrative clarity. He logged the tempering of the wild bull's aggression, the assignment of the marsh reed to its station, the calibration of the tides. Every component of the new stable system is accounted for, its function defined, its place in the ledger made permanent. His work is a monument to order, a testament to a world brought into a state of manageable equilibrium, a system documented with the cold precision of an audit. And yet, in this vast and detailed inventory of the living world, the greatest of its inhabitants are entirely absent. The mammoth, the mastodon, the colossal sloth that could strip a tree bare in minutes, they do not appear, not as assets, not as threats, not even as decommissioned failures. The smilodon, a predator engineered to a terrifying peak of efficiency, has no corresponding ME in Enki's catalog. The scribe, who recorded the function of a carp, has left no entry for the titans that once dominated the entire planet. The silence is not an oversight. It is a void. This is not the silence of a lost tablet or a damaged archive. It is a structured, systemic silence. It exists across all the records, from Eridu to Nippur, a consistent and profound omission. The administrative mind that saw fit to document the precise ecological role of a tamarisk tree made a deliberate choice not to record the existence of a creature the size of a building. It suggests that the scribe's work was not a complete history of the world, but a sanitized operational manual for the current version of the system, with the previous, failed iteration completely expunged from the record. We move from the textual to the temporal. The last of the great beasts vanished from the earth roughly 12,000 years ago. The first scribes began pressing their wedges into clay some 8,000 years later. Between the event and the record of the world that followed, there is a chasm of 4 millennia, 4,000 years of silence. An immense, unchronicled darkness separates the collapse of one biosphere and the rise of the civilization that would write the history of its replacement. This is the first layer of the great forgetting. One tries to imagine the weight of that time, not in numbers but in substance. The slow grinding of ice sheets into gravel, the gradual shift of riverbeds across a continent, the patient accumulation of dust and sediment, burying the bones of a world that was. It is a span of time so vast that memory itself becomes a geological force, subject to erosion, pressure, and metamorphosis. A story passed through 200 generations of humanity would not survive intact. It would become something else. A dream, a warning, a myth, or perhaps a heavily redacted administrative summary. The scribe's record, then, is not a direct memory. It is the end product of this immense filtering process. It is what remained of the story after 4,000 years of silence had scoured it clean of its terrifying details, its chaotic collapse, and its unmanageable scale. The cool, administrative language is not necessarily the language of the original architects. It is the language of a distant inheritor, a clerk tasked with maintaining the stable, simplified system that was built upon the ruins of the old one. A world whose true history was now too dangerous or too incomprehensible to be recorded in full. The investigation shifts again, from time to earth. An archaeologist works at the edge of a trench cut deep into a tell in southern Iraq. The layers are clear, a readable history of settlement. Near the top, the pottery of Babylon. Below that, Akkad. Deeper still, the foundations of Sumerian Uruk. Each layer is a chapter, a record of succession, a continuity of human presence. But if one were to dig deeper, past the earliest traces of settlement, past the sterile soil of the long abandonment, one would eventually reach a different kind of record altogether. It is the paleontological layer, the dark, carbon-rich soil of the late Pleistocene. And here, the story is not one of continuity, but of rupture. This layer is filled with the bones of the Megafauna, a testament to a world operating on a completely different biological scale. And then, with shocking abruptness, that layer ends. It is often marked by a thin, dark line in the sediment, a boundary line, a geological scar marking a planetary-scale termination event. Above this line, the Titans are gone. The world is suddenly, inexplicably empty of its largest inhabitants. There is no transitional layer. The geological record does not show a gradual decline, a slow fading of the great beasts. It shows a full stop. The system of biological gigantism does not evolve into the more modest system of the Holocene. It crashes. The world documented by the scribe does not emerge from the world of the mammoth. It is built on top of its grave, separated by a layer of ash and a long silence. The two archives, the geological and the textual, do not connect. They are the records of two different worlds, with a catastrophic, unrecorded event standing between them. The silence of purpose is perhaps the most profound. The scribe's records are filled with function, with the how of the system. The carp is assigned to the marsh to control vegetation. The predator is assigned to the herd to maintain its health. But the ultimate why is never stated. What was the objective of this meticulously organized biome? What was the final product this vast ecological factory was designed to produce? The operational logs detail the process, but the project's mission statement is conspicuously absent from the archive. This absence becomes an unnerving presence when considering the megafauna. If they were part of an earlier version of the system, what was their function? Their immense size, their high metabolism, their sheer biomass, all point to a system designed for a purpose of unimaginable scale and energy consumption. Their existence implies a goal so ambitious that it required life to be pushed to its absolute physical limits. And their sudden, total erasure from the planet implies a failure of that purpose so complete that the entire project had to be aborted and its records wiped. Let us hold this for a moment. The stillness in the room where you are, the exact time, the ambient sound. This is an act of recording. And in this moment, we are observing not a piece of evidence, but the precise shape of its absence. We are noting the outline of a void where the reason for an entire world should be. This silence is the true subject of the investigation. The texts describe the implementation of the new system with obsessive detail. The installation of the post-diluvian world. But there is no corresponding record of the decommissioning of the old one. There is no tablet titled Procedures for the System-Wide Recall of Megafauna. There is no log entry from Enlil reporting the successful termination of the Pleistocene biosphere. The process of the Great Erasure, the largest biological event in the last million years, went entirely unrecorded by the very beings whose records claim responsibility for managing the planet. This is the silence of the project managers. The records of Enki and Enlil that have survived are the operational files for the current, stable build of the planetary system. The project files for the previous, high-risk, high-yield iteration, the one that ended in catastrophic, system-wide failure, appear to have been deliberately archived in a place no one can find. Or, more likely, they were permanently deleted. The scribe was given the manual for the new, simplified world, not the post-mortem report on the old one. One can almost see it. A vast, celestial archive. A library of worlds. And in one section, a series of shelves, meticulously labeled, holding the design templates and operational histories of countless biospheres. But there is one shelf, or perhaps an entire wing, that is empty. It is covered not in dust, but in the clean, sterile emptiness of a deliberate and professional redaction. The space itself is the only remaining artifact of the failed project. The absence is the evidence. The search, therefore, is not for a missing piece of the puzzle. It is for the reason the puzzle was taken apart. The invisible antagonist is not a force of nature or a rival deity. It is the logic of the erasure itself. It is the cold, administrative decision to declare an entire chapter of planetary history a failed experiment, to seal the records, and to begin again with a more modest, more manageable, and more silent world. The silence was not an accident of time. It was an act of policy. And so, the silence ceases to be a passive absence of information. It becomes the most active and significant piece of data we possess. It is a signal. It tells us that the story we have, the orderly, administrative account of the scribe, is a replacement narrative. It was written to overwrite a memory so vast and so traumatic that it could not be allowed to persist. The silence is a testament to the scale of what it was created to conceal. The light in the archive room seems to dim. The focus shifts from the illuminated fragments on the table to the deep shadows that surround them. The work is no longer about deciphering the marks pressed into the clay. It is about learning to read the spaces between them. It is an exercise in listening not to the scribe's steady hand, but to the profound, calculated quiet that dictates his every word. A quiet that holds the ghost of a world too large to be remembered. If the scribe's record is not a history of the world's beginning, but an operational manual for its current state, then its very existence implies a world that came before. A manual is only written when a system is new, or when it has been fundamentally changed. It is a document of transition, designed to guide users in a reality that is not the one they were accustomed to. The meticulous, dispassionate tone of the texts ceases to be a mystery and becomes a feature. This is the language of a technical writer, composing the documentation for version 2.0 of a planetary operating system, ensuring all new functions are clearly defined for the administrators. This reframes the entire archive. The lists of ME are no longer a poetic catalog of life's diversity. They become a registry of approved assets, a list of the components certified for use in the new, stable build. The absence of the megafauna from these lists is no longer a simple omission. It is a matter of policy. They are the deprecated hardware of the previous system, intentionally left out of the new inventory because they are no longer supported. Their function, whatever it was, has been rendered obsolete by the new operational directive. We are not reading a history. We are reviewing a list of currently installed software. The division of labor between the others now appears in a different light. Enki, the custodian of the Abzu, is not a creator but a configuration manager, holding the master copies of the approved biological templates. Enlil is the system administrator for the live environment, enforcing the new parameters on the ground. The Igigi were the labor force for the initial hardware setup, the terraforming, and the Apkallu were the technicians sent to train a new local user, humanity, on the basic functions of the new interface, which we call civilization. The entire structure is one of a controlled top-down implementation of a new corporate environment. One stands back from the evidence, and the air in the room feels thin. The scale of the implication is dizzying. It suggests that our civilization is not the pinnacle of a long, unguided evolutionary process. It is a secondary installation, a carefully managed project initiated in the aftermath of a catastrophic, system-wide failure of a much larger, more ambitious predecessor. The 4,000-year gap between the megafauna extinction and the first scribes is no longer a chasm of forgetting. It is the time it took to scrub the old system and deploy the new one. The world we inhabit, then, is a quiet one by design. The biological titans of the Pleistocene were not an accident of nature that spun out of control. They were the intended output of a system designed for a purpose we cannot fathom, a purpose that required life to be scaled to its absolute maximum expression of power and size. Their sudden, uniform disappearance was not an extinction. It was a decommissioning, a deliberate, planet-wide shutdown of a project that had either served its purpose or failed so spectacularly that its continuation was no longer viable. The mind seeks metaphor, but the evidence offers only cold procedure. The great flood myths, present in cultures across the globe, cease to be tales of divine retribution against sinful humanity. They become a distorted, fragmented memory of the decommissioning process itself. A planetary-scale cleansing, a washing of the slate, a protocol executed to erase the remnants of the old operating system before the installation of the new. The water was not an instrument of punishment. It was a solvent used to prepare the surface for a fresh start. This suggests that the others were not gods who abandoned their creation. They were project managers who stayed on to oversee the next phase. They saw the collapse of the megafauna system not as a tragedy, but as a data point. The experiment with biological gigantism had failed to meet its objectives. A new approach was required, one based not on raw biological power, but on something else, something smaller, more adaptable, and more easily managed, something that could be given instructions. The scribe, therefore, is the voice of this new management. He is not remembering a distant mythical past. He is transcribing the foundational documents of the current operational reality. His silence on the world that came before is not a sign of ignorance, but of discipline. He is an employee of the new administration, and the history of the company's failed projects is not part of his training material. His job is to document the world as it is now supposed to function, not to ask questions about the one that was dismantled. To remain with this archive is to look past the scribe's hand and into the silence he was tasked to uphold. It is to trace the faint outline of the older, erased system, and to acknowledge that the history we know may only be an addendum to a much larger story. The Earth itself becomes a different kind of artifact. It is not a pristine, natural world. It is a repurposed asset. The foundations of our biosphere are built directly upon the ruins of a far more potent one. We live in the quieted, managed, and carefully curated aftermath of an industrial-scale biological experiment whose goals remain entirely outside our frame of reference. The very stability of our ecosystem, the predictability of our seasons, the familiar scale of our wildlife, all may be the features of a system deliberately simplified for the sake of control. This changes the nature of our own existence. If civilization was an installation, then humanity was not the intended master of the planet, but a component integrated into it. Our purpose, from the perspective of the system's architects, may have been functional. We were the solution to a problem that the mammoths and the smilodons could not solve. We were the manageable variable, the programmable bioagent introduced to maintain the new, stable equilibrium. Our oldest records are the memory of our own initial programming. The silence, then, is not just a historical void. It is an active, ongoing state. If the world is a managed system, and the managers made a deliberate decision to erase the memory of the previous iteration, then that policy may still be in effect. The absence of evidence is not proof of absence. It is evidence of a successful and continuing cover-up. The greatest secret is not that gods once walked the earth, but that the administrators of a failed planetary project never left. The feeling is one of profound dislocation. We are not who we thought we were. We are living not in a world of our own making, but in a carefully prepared enclosure, a successor project whose primary design principle seems to have been the prevention of a recurrence of the previous failure. Our history is a footnote. Our gods are a misinterpretation of a board of directors, and our planet is a legacy system, still running on protocols we were never meant to understand. This does not resolve the mystery. It amplifies it to an unbearable degree. It suggests that the answers are not buried in the past, waiting to be excavated. They are embedded in the very structure of our reality, hidden in plain sight, in the quiet stability of a world that was deliberately made to forget the sheer, terrifying scale of what it once was. The questions are no longer about history or mythology. They are about the nature of the cage. One is left looking at the two records, the two archives, side by side. On one hand, the cuneiform tablet, a document of order, of measure, of function assigned, a testament to a system brought under control. On the other, a fossilized bone of a creature that defied that control, a relic of impossible scale, a physical remnant of a world of unrestrained power. The space between them is not empty. It is filled with the silent, unwavering hum of an operation that is still in progress. The final implication settles like a layer of fine dust. The scribe did not just record the past, he recorded the terms and conditions of our present reality. And the first unspoken term is that we do not ask about the project that came before. The silence is not a mystery to be solved. It is a rule to be followed. The museum is quiet now. The crowds are gone. The only sound is the low, steady hum of the machines that hold time at bay, that keep the air dry and the temperature constant. Under a single, focused beam of light, it rests. A fragment of baked river clay, no larger than a human hand. It is where we began. Here, in the stillness, the journey does not end. It comes to rest, returning to the source of the first question, a question that has only grown larger in the intervening silence. The object itself seems indifferent to our gaze. It is not a king's monument, built to inspire awe. It is a piece of administration, a node in a long-dead network of information. Its survival is an accident of chemistry and climate, the unintended consequence of a clerk's daily work. It has outlasted the temples where it was stored and the empires that rose and fell above it, not because it was sacred, but because it was filed away. It is a single line item from a ledger that has somehow floated to the surface of our time. One can almost feel the presence of the scribe's hand, the faint pressure that pushed the stylus into the damp clay 4,000 years ago. His intention was not to create a myth for the ages, but to close out a file, to make a correct entry, to ensure the record was accurate according to the protocols he had been taught. He was a functionary in a system, and his world, as he recorded it, was one of functions. A world of assigned stations and measured outcomes. A world made legible. Outside these climate-controlled walls, a dry wind still moves across the plains of southern Iraq. It lifts dust from the tops of the tells, the quiet mounds that cover the foundations of Eridu, the first city. That landscape holds the other archive, the one written in strata of sediment and fossilized bone. The scribe's orderly world is a thin layer of text laid over a much deeper, more chaotic silence. The silence of the ruins and the silence of the earth are not the same, but they speak of the same profound, unrecorded rupture. That silence is no longer an absence. It has become a presence in the room. It is filled with the phantom weight of the mammoths, the ghost image of the Smilodon, the sheer impossible scale of a biosphere that the scribe's neat ledgers never once acknowledge. The silence is the negative space around his work, the vast, dark canvas upon which his small, orderly world was painted. It is the memory of the system that had to be erased before his own could be written. The initial question, why was creation recorded in the language of a clerk, has expanded beyond the confines of the text. It now encompasses the earth itself. We are left to wonder if the scribe's record is a history at all, or if it is something else. A user manual for a replacement world, a set of operating instructions for a system installed after a catastrophic failure, with all mention of the previous failed version deliberately redacted from the documentation. The two records remain, held in a state of permanent, unresolved tension. The fossilized bone and the cuneiform tablet. One speaks of a world of unrestrained biological power, a system running at a scale that seems to defy logic. The other speaks of a world brought into a state of meticulous, bureaucratic control. They do not connect. They do not rhyme. They are the artifacts of two different realities, with a chasm of fire and ice and 4,000 years of silence standing between them. Perhaps the control was a consequence of the power. Perhaps the scribe's world of quiet, manageable order was not a beginning, but a response. A carefully engineered and deliberately simplified system built upon the foundations of one that had grown too large, too energetic, too dangerous to sustain. A planetary-scale containment protocol, documented by clerks who were never told what, precisely, was being contained. The order was not a choice. It was a necessity. The light in the display case seems to dim, or perhaps the shadows around it simply deepen. The fine details of the cuneiform impressions blur, and what comes into focus is not the text, but the shape of the void it occupies. The outline of the great omission, the space where the purpose of the Titans and the reason for their termination should be. The record is a map with a vast, uncharted territory at its center, marked only with silence. The investigation does not conclude. It dissolves into a state of watchfulness. The work is not to find the missing tablet that will explain everything. It is to learn to read the silence itself, to understand that the absence of a record can be a more powerful testament than any text. The path does not lead to a final answer, but to a permanent state of inquiry, a deeper and more structured form of the same initial question. We are left with the dissonance. The cool, almost alien rationality of an administrative system that documented the assignment of a function to a marsh reed, and the profound, inexplicable silence it maintained regarding the erasure of an entire world of biological titans. The logic of the system and the silence of its history are the two poles of the mystery, and we are suspended between them, in the quiet of the archive. The narrator's voice recedes now, leaving only the presence of the object. The tablet seems to absorb the light, holding not just the memory of the scribe's world, but the immense negative gravity of the world he was forbidden to mention. It is an artifact of what was remembered, and a monument to what was deliberately forgotten. The two forces are held in perfect, fragile balance within its baked clay form. The low hum of the building is the only sound, a steady note holding against the deep quiet of the night. Here, in the still air of the museum, the past is not a distant country. It is an adjacent room from which a profound silence emanates, a room whose door was closed a very long time ago, but never locked. The silence is not an end. It is a state of permanence. The image holds. The small clay tablet, a fragment of a forgotten cosmic administration, resting in its solitary pool of light. It offers no final word. It makes no promises. It simply remains. A quiet sentinel guarding a silence that has persisted for 12,000 years. A silence that shows no sign of ever being broken.